Theodore. He's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Fodak, Hank and George, and the harbor master too.
Even as the tugs waited for the dispatcher to begin the morning work meeting, there was a feeling in the air that this day was going to be special. Still, the tugs were surprised when the dispatcher told them they would all be needed for one ship. George the Valiant was certain there must be some mistake. All of us for one ship? Well, that's never happened before. So many tugs for one ship, said Theodore. You'd think the Queen was coming. Well, everyone laughed at that.
And immediately I'm creeped out by these faces. But anyway, Theodore just so happens to be right, as the Queen of all ocean liners, the Queen Stephanie, is coming. It's a pretty big opportunity since not everyone gets the chance to tow her into port. And of course, Theodore is willing to do whatever he can to help.
The tugboats lined up neatly at the harbor's mouth and waited impatiently for the big ship. Suddenly, there she was, the Queen Stephanie, appearing out of a fog bank like some huge floating city. Well, she was the largest, most beautiful ship Theodore had ever seen. I mean, even Emily and George, who had been to sea many times and seen all kinds of wonderful ships, stared in amazement.
Oh yeah, they look real amazed, don't they? But I gotta hand it to her. The Queen Stephanie really is a beautiful-looking ship.
Pearl, the pilot boat, was in charge of the tow. Well, are we going to float here all day, she said, or shall we help Her Majesty into our harbor? The tugboats roared into action. When they had all buttoned their tow ropes onto the Queen, Emily gave a blast on her whistle. The tugboats set out with the Queen Stephanie to a special dock where she would be staying. George was especially proud as he began to sail under Benjamin Bridge, towing the great ship. I'm the happiest tugboat in the world, he thought. And then, disaster. Benjamin Bridge called out, "Look out!" Oh, but it was already too late. There was a dreadful sound of grinding metal. And then the huge ship simply stopped.
Ouch. That's gotta hurt.
Unfortunately, this had to do with the rising tide, which was higher than usual because of a big storm. And with all that in mind, came another problem for the tugs.
I'm afraid we have another problem, said Fodak quietly. The water in the harbor is still rising. No one spoke, but they all realized what Fodak was telling them. If the water was rising, then the Queen Stephanie would rise as well. But Benjamin Bridge would stay exactly where he was right now. If they didn't manage to free the liner soon, well, either Benjamin or the Queen, or both, could be seriously hurt.
You mean to say that Benjamin will come collapsing on top of the Queen? Damn, that got dark fast. With that said, the bigger tugs begin to pull and try to free the Queen.
The big tugs, George, Emily, and Fodak, they tried to pull the great ocean liner free from under the bridge, but they couldn't budge her one bit. We just can't do it, said George, sounding like he was ready to give up. We aren't strong enough, agreed Emily.
You're not strong enough? Surely you can pull her. She's not that wedged in. With Plan A failed, Pearl suggests that they tug in the Big Harbour cranes to lift Benjamin off the Queen. Sounds like a good plan, but is there enough time to do so?
Theodore couldn't bear to just float by and watch Benjamin Bridge in so much trouble. He wanted to do something, but what? Emily, I want to help. What can I do? He asked quietly. Well, Theodore had never seen Emily look so sad and so tired. We all want to help, Theodore, she said, but you better just keep away. You don't want to be too close when she couldn't even finish the sentence. Instead, she went sailing off to help with the cranes.
When what happens? You wanna maybe elaborate on that? Wait, I forgot. Gotta be friendly with the kiddies, don't we? And as things couldn't get any worse, take a look at what happens to Theodore.
She must think we're too small to help, said Theodore sadly. Look out! Yelled Theodore. He pushed Hank out of the way just in time. It had been very close, and the splash had soaked Theodore. George, Emily, and Fodak rushed over. Are you all right, Theodore? Asked Emily. Theodore gave 2 quick toots to say yes. You should return to the dock and pump yourself out, said George. But Theodore didn't want to leave. I want to help, he said. George could only sigh. Sorry, Theodore, but, well, you're just too small for this big job, he said.
Can I just say, damn, that was close!
Can I just say that this is one of the most heart-pounding moments in the show? Talk about quick thinking, Theodore. And George seriously has to say Theodore is too small for the job? Come on, George, do you really have to say that? Like in Thomas, no engine or tug is too small to get the job done.
Come on, Theodore, said Hank. We'd better get out of the way. I guess so, replied Theodore, and he turned to go. Hank, he complained, I can hardly move. All this extra water from the splash makes me heavier. Look, Theodore, said Hank with a little smile. Now you're even shorter than I am. And he continued to push his waterlogged friend. I know, said Theodore. It's because of the water from the splash. It weighs me down. And then Theodore the small and the wet had an idea. And it did seem like something magical. Stop, he shouted at Hank. Theodore was very excited. I must talk to the others. Push me, Hank, push. Hank didn't know what Theodore was thinking, but he knew that his friend Theodore had an idea. Oh, that was good enough for Hank.
Good old Theodore to the rescue with his ideas. Hopefully this one will do some good. With Benjamin soon on the brink of collapsing, Theodore hurries over and explains his plan. And a few things before we start up again. Why are you guys pushing the Queen from the side? You bigger tugs are really not that bright, are you? And what is with this episode being so dark? Are we really waiting for Benjamin to just, let's just continue, please.
Well, said Theodore, if we can't raise the bridge, why not lower the ship? Well, all the tugs stared at Theodore. He must have water in his wheelhouse, said George. But as usual, Fodak was curious. What do you mean, Theodore? He asked. Theodore spoke quickly. When I was splashed by that falling piece from the bridge, the water that filled me up made me heavier. Is that why you're floating lower in the water? Asked Fodak. Because the water made you heavier? That's right, said Theodore. Well, Emily joined in. You mean, if we can make the Queen Stephanie heavier, she might get lower, too. Enough to float out from under Benjamin. Well, Benjamin was listening now. Try it, please, he called down. Yes, right now, agreed the Queen. Fodak knew exactly what to do. Water, he said. I'll use my fire hoses to pump water into the Queen, and that'll make her float lower just like Theodore.
Theodore's plan just might work, and the tugs are hoping for the chance to set her free. And after a lot of hard work, the tugs were able to free Stephanie.
Well, sure enough, the water Fodak was pumping into the great ship made her heavier, so she could sink lower. Benjamin Bridge gave a huge sigh of relief. The Queen wasn't scraping against him anymore, and the Queen Stephanie was beginning to feel much better, too. It's working, shouted Fodak. She's coming free. Pull, Pearl called to George and Emily. Push, she called back to Theodore and Hank. And then the Queen Stephanie, the largest ocean liner in the world, began to move. At last, she was free. All the boats and ships in the harbor began to blow their whistles and toot their horns. Even the Queen gave a joyous blast of her own.
And you guys thought Theodore was too small. Kids, what did we learn today? Never judge a person by their size. They just might surprise you.
Just goes to show to always listen to others, either big or small. They could really help you out in the jam.
So afterwards, Pearl tells Theodore that she has a very special job in store for him after saving the Queen.
Theodore was startled. Another job? For me? Later that afternoon, the tugs were guiding the Queen to another dock. George and the others were at the back. And sure enough, Pearl did have another job for Theodore. A very special job. Theodore was given the place of honor, pulling from the front. For Theodore had proved that the small can be just as important as the big.
And that concludes Theodore and the Queen. Alright, Spencer, give me your thoughts.
This episode was good. I think that in some ways it could be dark but also uplifting. This episode shows to always listen to others and speak up when ideas surface to fix a problem.
You could really feel the urgency of the situation at hand, and it's critical that the tugs do whatever they can to help, otherwise not only the Queen, but Benjamin, or again both, could have gotten really hurt. Once again, I do feel bad for Theodore being pushed to the side just because of his size. As I've mentioned already, size really shouldn't matter, especially during what could have been a perilous situation. The way I look at this episode, it almost sort of feels like a little engine that could kind of plot. We have our main focus character, who's degraded about their size and abilities, a problem ensues, and said character steps in and does whatever they can to help, and the day is saved. A very reasonable plotline for little Theo, don't you agree? Aside from that, viewers are introduced to the Queen Stephanie, who once again is a magnificent looking ship. I really hope we get to see more of her in future episodes. And as for music, I really gotta hand it to Graham for really filling those notes up with all that tension. It's still enough to give me goosebumps whenever I watch this. Overall, this episode is definitely worth checking out. If some of you guys haven't seen this, I highly recommend that you do. Up next is Theodore and the Blue Nose.